Welcome to the Talent Revolution, Tales from the Trenches. I'm Jill Caniglio-Kirk.
And I'm Joe Shambaum.
Joe, change is one of the few things we can all be certain of. Wouldn't you agree, whether it's a reorg, a merger, maybe it's a change in leadership? Today, all these conversations on how we use AI, it's clear change is not going anywhere, and it's something that's happening every day in all of our organizations. So today, I'm excited to dive into this topic about HR's role as a change agent inside of organizations. It's all too often that HR is kind of the afterthought, right? And they're brought in to clean up the messes. Here's the mop, do the damage control. But successful organizational transformation is clearly shaped by HR being at the table early and being part of that strategy setting. So that's what today's episode is all about. Changes in a process, it's a human experience, which is a quote often attributed to John Kotter. And I think that perfectly encapsulates what today's episode is all about.
Absolutely. And we are proud and happy to have a special guest here with us. Ciera Parks, welcome to the show. Ciera is a seasoned people operations leader and cultural strategist, currently serving as the VP of People Operations and Culture at Vanks. She's also the CEO of CWC HR Training and Solutions, bringing over 15 years of experience helping organizations build strong, inclusive, and high-performing workplaces. Ciera's passionate about empowering leaders and creating people-first cultures that drive real business impact. Welcome to the show, Ciera.
Hey, y'all. Glad to be here. This is exciting, right? I think this is an important topic. And so I'm excited to share how my experience in corporate America and then launching my own consulting firm has helped change the way change happens in the workplace.
Change is inevitable. Absolutely. Ciera, anything else that you want to share about your background? Introduce yourself that I missed on that intro.
I think it might be helpful to know that I've had quite a variety of roles in my career. And I say that to say because industry doesn't matter when we talk about change. And so having worked in cannabis, higher ed, pharmaceuticals, e-commerce, manufacturing environments, all are going to have the same types of issues when we talk about change management and how it shows up for best practices.
100%. So Jill, kick it off for us.
Yeah, Ciera, this is a topic Joe and I've really wanted to tackle for a long time. So thanks again for joining us. I guess if we get to the heart of it, what is how do you define change management? What does that really mean to you?
So for me, I would define it as things being different in the workplace than they were yesterday. Inevitably, people are going to come in, people are going to have differences of opinions. There are going to be shifts in the business. There are going to be things that change in the economy, things that change in the market that then dictate us having to do something different in the workplace. And that's how I would define change management.
Yeah, and I would say, it's clear that sometimes we only think about significant large changes that are projects, but sometimes it's things that are minimized and people don't pay a lot of attention to that really kind of stir up the workforce.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. I can think of several times in my career where people thought that this is not going to be a big deal. This is not something that we need to be worried about. This is not something that we need to do any type of damage control around or risk mitigation. And then the next thing you know, it becomes a whole thing.
Right. And I think there's a lot of HR leaders out there listening going, oh, yeah, that happened to me today. That happened to me last week. And I think one of the questions on their mind is, how do I get in front of this? How do I get my voice, my involvement to help steer these things? And I'm sure you have some great strategies to share around that.
So this is something that I'm super passionate about. I am an advocate for HR leaders having a seat at the table. So much so that I now coach leaders in this space. I coach other consultants in this space, and I train HR leaders to show up in a way that they now have a seat and a voice at the table. And so there's a couple of things if you feel like you are sitting in a seat right now that's not at the table, it's maybe over at the window or maybe not in the room at all, that you should be doing to make sure that you can pull up and have a voice. The first one is to make sure that you are telling people the data and the information that's relevant to them. So often HR people are storytellers, and that's great, right? But not every senior level leader wants to communicate via anecdotal story. What does the data say about what you're trying to get across? So that's the first thing. Tell the story and lead with the data. The other thing that's really important for you to do is make sure that you understand who the players are if you're not in the room on how to get in the room. And this is office politics 101. Who do I need to be aligned with to make sure that even if I'm not in the room, I'm at home sick, or otherwise I wouldn't be there at all, they're still going to tell my story, or they're still going to carry the narrative to help drive the initiatives that I want at the table. So those are the two main things that I would say people need to be doing right now if they're not at the table, but they should be.
Right. I think those are great suggestions. And I would just say you have to do this with intent, right? And it's a daily grind. It's not a once and done, right? It's how you carry yourself, how you build relationships with everyone. And to your point, how do you understand your audience and speak their language?
Absolutely. This is something that you have to do day in and day out. And I'm sure there are some days where you don't want to do this. But this is not something that if you're not already at the table that you can just turn around and say, hey, this is tomorrow for me. This may be months and months before you build enough trust for people to say, hey, I want you in the room. I mean, I think there's also some weight in saying, do you show up in a way that's trustworthy? Because when people have HR people sit at the table, there might be things at the table or at the conversation that are coming up that aren't always HR friendly. But your discretion and your ability to understand what's happening in the room and the tone in the room is crucial.
Right. Absolutely. So now if we shift and look at what, the role HR plays and kind of what questions do we ask? To me, it all centers around kind of how our brains are wired and the questions we ask. So if we look at that point of view, what advice would you have there?
So there's a couple questions we should be asking pending we're at the table or we're getting wind of this at any point in the change management process. The first one is, who is this going to impact? And I often think sometimes leaders look at this in a silo. Oh, it's only impacting that team. That's never true, because the morale in the workplace sees that there's a change, be it a raise, be it cuts, be it an office shift, be it a return to work policy. One change doesn't just impact a few people. It's going to impact in a ripple effect across the organization. So who's impacted, and then what are some of the impacts that we maybe didn't foresee as being the initial ones? The other one is, what's the timeline? There is no way we can just start moving on a change if we don't know what's a realistic timeline. And of course, we know leaders want to move very quickly, and I think HR needs to be able to follow suit. But if this is unreasonable, we need to be able to say, hey, this is just not something that can be done in this way. And or the only way that we can do this in this timeline is to insert whatever the reasonable accommodation might be. The other thing I think we should be asking is, what's the budget? What's the budget, right? So different from cost, what is the budget allocated to this change? Because cost is, I can go out and I can book the nicest office or book the fanciest broker to go find us a new space, and money is no object. That's one thing, that's cost. Budget is what's been allocated by finance for us to spend on this change and change initiatives thereafter that are related to this initial one. Those are the three things I would initially say are questions you should be asking at the table. Some other things are, who are other partners involved in this? What other leaders need to be notified? And most importantly, what support do those leaders need? I remember I was working at a large organization and we were rolling out a language program to hire folks who were ESOL, right? English speakers of other language. And at no point did anyone ever say, hey, do the leaders that we have in that department speak the language of the folks that we're hiring? Literally, no one ever said this. And so we hired hundreds of people, and then we experienced all these additional barriers. And had anyone said, hey, does anyone in that department speak Spanish? Had anyone said that, we would have quickly identified that this is already an initiative that is not going to go well or going to have major barriers.
Fair point. Sometimes the most basic things are often the things that are missed that cause like the most trauma, right? And the most, and I guess maybe you could talk about that situation and just say, how do you recover from something like that? Maybe you can just give us a little example of, it's not the ideal situation, but we were caught off guard here. How do we pivot, right?
Yeah, so I think what ends up happening is you have all these unintended outcomes from what you thought was a really good idea and a really great initiative in theory. And so once you start to hear where things are falling apart, you got to be able to have a sounding board for people to come with these complaints and concerns. And I think so often leaders want to say, hey, just deal with it. Go back to the floor. We're not going to it is what it is. We're already, sailing down the creek with this, but you got to have someone who's a designated point or maybe a couple of points to say, I am here to listen. I want to hear the feedback. And then more importantly, Jill and Joe, is to understand what suggestions they have. Sometimes we're not close enough to the problem to present a real solution that works. And so if someone's in it every day and they say, hey, I suggest we do A, B, and C, and you think that's a viable option, why not try it? Why are we trying to reinvent a wheel that we can't seem to wrap our arms around? And so that's the first thing, feedback, and then finding solutions from the ground level. The other thing I would recommend once you've had this type of fallout from an initiative that didn't go so well is being able to apologize and course correct quickly. Quickly, right? Who do we need to hire? Who do we need to shuffle around? Who do we need to now perhaps have conversations with about them having stretch assignments or providing them some extra incentives to do work that might be outside of their usual realm? All of these things matter. And if all else fails, I think we forget to say, let's just bring in someone as a fractional stopgap.
Right.
You don't always have to have the talent in-house.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. A few things you said there really jogged my mind on a few topics. One of them is really when we enter a change, do we really do our homework in anticipating every different person's reaction to that? Right. And like you said, we may not be looking at we may not even be considering certain populations if the change isn't targeted at them, right? So I feel like that, do your homework, anticipate reactions and have strategies and plans when things go the way you think they might go. So at least you're quickly ready to react. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but for me, I think that's been an effective strategy to say, this is what I think the questions will be. This is what I think the reactions are going to be. This is step 2, 3, and 4. If that happens, right? So you're kind of constantly trying to be ahead of it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think anytime you're going to roll out a major change to an employee population, an FAQ that is preemptively developed is a key strategy. And then, of course, as additional questions come up, you can always add to it or re-release the document. But you have to be thinking about that. And I think HR sometimes is sitting at the table or maybe getting wind of change and they're thinking these things, but saying them out loud makes you sound like a negative Nancy. And so even if this is something that you do proactively, I think how you spin it to the team is what's going to matter most.
Yeah, fair point. And I think there's probably other people saying, well, if I suggest it, then do I have to take this on myself, right? And maybe that HR person is feeling a little uncomfortable about the breadth of the change versus their piece of it. I'm sure that's something you've encountered in your career.
Absolutely. I mean, not everything is HR's job. Contrary to popular belief, right? It's not HR's job to do everything. But if you think very critically and you're very vocal about what part of this do you want HR to own, question number 1, and question number 2, by proxy of the role that you play in the organization, what naturally falls into your wheelhouse? And you can only present good thought leadership in that space and then be a thought partner to other folks who own other parts of the change.
Right. And I felt like from my seat when this has come up and something like an FAQ, sometimes taking the role of setting up the process and saying, being the person to suggest, here's the format, here's the template, here's the timeline, and kind of project leading some of that kind of puts you in a position of saying, yeah, you're not expected to do it all yourself. You're kind of defining who needs to do what and setting up that process. And then it's not necessarily all on you. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, I think in doing that, Jill, you also have to have someone be accountable to this. So if HR is not the person who's saying, put the questions in, put the answers in, who is, right? Or who is the partner to help that accountability to make sure that these questions get answered?
Right.
I think the other thing that needs to come into it is everyone likes to keep this close knit because they're afraid of confidentiality and it leaking, but they don't bring in other perspectives, right? I think one avenue is somebody that may be totally opposite and that brings that other perspective, those questions, those ideas that you might not think of, then it might help everything. I mean, that's just one avenue that I've never seen. It's like only this department and this one get to talk about it. And then all these other avenues come in and they're like, oh, I didn't even think of those things because they're only at mindset.
So true, so true. And I think if you're rolling out a big change, there's layers, right? So of course, the initial discussion of the change happens at probably the most smallest table, right? And then I think from there, you start to layer in additional folks who add context to it. And I think at each level, you add other insights to say, okay, when we bring the next group of folks into the room, we know exactly what we're going to be able to answer or respond to if at that point it leaks. Like you have to have some layer of, if it leaks at this level, what do we know and what do we have to go forward with from there?
And don't let TA be the last ones. I got
No.
It always feels like, oh, we didn't know. And we're recruiting, we're branding, we're marketing, we're hiring, we're shaping these things. We know so much from all these other companies and what's going on. And we feel, I mean, I'm going to speak for a lot of the TA folks that we're the last ones to know. And it's really frustrating. So I got to put that in there for everyone.
So true. Like as an HR person who partners on the TA side heavily, right? I think there is this distinction that, oh, they're recruiting, they're just going to bring people in. So whatever we do over here, they're just going to bring in the people who like this and like how we do this. And it's like, you can't go find the right people to come into the organization unless you know what you're building and where the rest of the company is going. And people really do often forget that you are the gatekeeper to the organization. You are the ambassador to the community. You are the ambassador to the job market and the economic insights. Like you guys are it on the TA side.
We can also affect that change, right? Because we can bring in that change agents and the good change and I don't want to say bad change, but that evolution of where things are going. We can start that and also brand and market it if there's a bigger shift. I mean, it's getting a seat at the table, which is usually one of the last ones, but it's getting in there. So I just want to advocate for that side of it.
That's a really good point. Spot on.
Yep. Yeah. I think the next thing that would be on the minds of HR practitioners out there would be, what am I maybe not thinking of? What are the key elements of having a successful change management campaign? Maybe you can share some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, it's one of those things until you've done it, it's probably hard to know what you should do, right? But I think there are a couple of models that you can always lean into. And my particular favorite model is the Lewin model. And this is probably the most simplest of them all. It's the Lewin model of change. And it simply says you have something that's happening right now in your organization. And that's called unfreezing, right? We know exactly what we need to change. And then in the middle, what we're going to do is we're going to make the changes and then we're going to refreeze and stabilize the organization. And I think if we always envisioned it being like a cup of ice or a cup of water, where we're saying something's going on, we need to take this out, put this in, make this change, reshape it, and then refreeze on the other side, I think it would be easier for folks to visualize what it means to say, only after we've got all the right components in the cup should we put it back in the freezer and call it ready to go.
Love the analogy. I have not heard of that model before, so I will be doing a little ChatGPT visit a little later.
Absolutely.
So if you think about some of the key elements that you would go through in that process, maybe you can speak to that for us.
So the first one is getting a good data set. So often we start making changes because we feel like something needs to change today. We need to quickly make a change. And I agree, right? Sometimes we do need to move quickly, but it's about you being able to say, I know exactly what the inputs are that are giving us the undesired results or outcomes that we're getting today. So it's collecting the right data, figuring out what the real root of the problem is, what's causing the undesired state that we're currently in. And so that's what we do at the first stage. Once we get it to the middle, then we're going to start to involve our, what I would call informal thought leaders or informal leaders in the organization to help us shape what other inputs we should be making here. And then we also need to involve the folks who are going to continue to freeze and stabilize this change once we've decided on all of those pieces. Because once we put it back in the freezer and we freeze the change that we've made, what you now have to do is trust that you've got everything right. And now you have to continue on a daily basis reinforcing this. So someone has questions, people are upset. Okay, well, do we have FAQs? Have we considered what it means if we need to go back and purchase other things? Have we considered what it means if there is something fatally flawed with the process that we thought would work? Have we considered what it would cost us from a budgetary perspective if this is now leaking in ways that we hadn't thought or hadn't considered or hadn't foreseen before we got this far? So I think it's just about making sure the data inputs are right, we've got the right folks involved, and then after the fact, we're reinforcing what we really wanted to see the change be.
Right. And I think one thing that jumped out from that conversation and what you shared there is if your team doesn't understand the why, you've lost, right?
Yeah.
It's a really important piece of it. And I think it's not to be minimized to have conversations around those things so that everybody starts on the same page and you can kind of have those discussions, right? I think the data set is definitely part of it. But when you were talking about it, I thought sometimes we pull people into something we're talking about the change, but they really don't understand the why, and we don't get alignment there, right?
Absolutely. Most changes don't fail because people don't want the change. They fail because people don't understand why we're moving in that direction.
Absolutely.
Help me, guys. What's the data? I mean, obviously data is in many different forms, but what you talk about gathering data multiple times. What does that data look like, and what kind of data? I mean, there's employee surveys, I know, but there's other demographic. What does that data look like? Help me.
Good question, Joe. So there's a couple things, right? When we talk about the data set, first of all, HR and finance probably have the most access to data in the organization of every other department. And so depending upon what the change is, it's not always about employee surveys because that might not be what's relevant for the change at hand. It's more looking at things like what do the salaries dictate? What do our turnover metrics say? What does our engagement score say? What does our hiring or recruitment metrics say? What do the budgets say about ebbs and flows in the business? So as we're looking at things, I'll give you a really, really good example of what kind of data is relevant. If we were thinking about opening a new location, of course, we're going to look at market data to say, can this location support or is there a customer demand in that area? Yes or no? And most people will go, right? There's tons of demand. There's no other competitor in the market. Build it. And what we fail to realize is there a population that can get to this work location, one, and two, are they skilled enough to do whatever it is we're doing in this area? That is a major one where like the demand, the money is going to be there. We just know it, but you haven't considered all of these other things. And I've seen that go flat several times in that way.
Yeah, so that goes, I mean, it's totally off topic, but why? I mean, and there's got to be the data set of why a lot of these companies have these locations in these remote locations in the world. And, you know, us in the recruiting go, why? Because they're obviously the data's there, but it's but I get it. But that helps. Thank you. Clarify that.
Absolutely. Or sometimes there is no data, right? Like there's no data that says what we're trying to do here is going to work. And so if you think about in these rural areas, if no one's went in to say, hey, we need someone who's going to be able to, I don't know, build some widget, and there's no skill set for building widgets in the area, it's a completely agricultural area, and folks are not going to travel in, the schedules don't align, there's no bus schedule, there's no public transportation, the nearest farm or whatever is 40 miles away. These are things that you maybe don't have access to, but they're going to come up at some point when you're trying to hire and can't get anyone to come into work.
What about an org change, right? So it's changing the structure. I mean, I know there's other companies and a lot of the times that's not public, but how do you get the data set for an organizational structure change?
So a lot of times I've seen this tied to the budget. So we are doing an org structure or a restructure based on the salaries and the output. And I think some really good examples of this as of late are all the layoffs related to AI. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? I think there were so many people who thought that their job would be completely safe from AI encroachment. And that's just not the case, right? What has happened is folks have been able to say, we're restructuring because we found tools that are able to do your job better for a cheaper rate and faster. And so in that way, you are now saying, I'm going to restructure my organization all based on the cost associated with it and not at all about what institutional knowledge is walking out the door, how many of your families and community members have been impacted by this. and even more importantly, the public, right? The public perception of what you're doing in the industry to all of these folks who are impacted by the layoff or restructuring.
Yeah, great example. Great example, because I know it's happening. It's really happening everywhere. So if we look specifically at communication, I see that as being one of the backbones of this process. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts around how do you ensure successful communication and make sure that that is something you're doing well in a project like this?
So, Jill, I'll be very honest. You're never going to be able to communicate enough. You're never. I've never seen a single change happen in my career where someone said, oh man, I knew everything I needed to know every single step of the way. It doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen not because people aren't doing their job. It doesn't happen because they didn't communicate well. Inevitably, people just aren't always going to receive the communication methods and mode that you put out. I don't check my email. I don't check text. I didn't listen to the voicemail that you sent. I didn't read the teleprompters. I didn't look at the employee newsletter. I didn't go to the meeting that they had on Friday where they discussed this. And so it's not for lack of trying. You're just not going to reach everyone in a way that they find effective for them. And so that's the first thing I want to put out there, right? Like some of the communication is going to fail a little bit.
Yeah, I would just say that the point that jumps out there to me is really you have to tackle it from many fronts. And one strategy I found successful is like manager notes, right? Like kind of a cascading process of ideally everyone's hearing the same message from the same people, but a manager's then reinforcing it in smaller groups or doing a small sit down with their team to collect questions, right? Or having that kind of feedback loop, right? That you message out, you bring back what questions, maybe the things that people are afraid to raise their hand and ask in a big meeting, right? The people who are on teams that don't want to be the person to ask that question. So that kind of feedback loop is also another important aspect, as well as the role that the manager plays. And hopefully they have a smaller scope of direct reports that they can, at least make sure, see the message, read the message, hear the message, even if they can't speak to all the points in it. So,
I mean, that's such a good way because those are the boots on the ground, right? The folks who are talking to the people every day. I think the other thing to consider here is that there are leaders who aren't comfortable cascading messages because they either A, don't understand the why, or B, don't agree with it. And so I think there's there's a level of training that I think that needs to happen for leaders up and down the organization to say, how is it that you can communicate well with your team, even in the face of adversity? And then also being able to deliver tough messages. Sometimes leaders don't tell the news to their people because they don't want to be the bearer of bad news. And I can't tell you how many leaders I work with who are so conflict averse that if it involves some bad news, they are out.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen that, right? Just kicking the can up the road for someone else to give the message when it should have been you.
Right.
I mean, the most effective I've been is being transparent, being, frequent communication, letting them know what's going on. Because I've been through several where I didn't even know fully of what's happening, but I kind of have an idea, and you share what you can of what you know. Here's what's happening. Answer the questions. Give that safe space of, the more I know, and I'll share it with you to give back. And then I try to cascade that up as well, going back to other leaders. Hey, this is a concern. When do we know? When do we know what's happening? When do we know what's going on? And again, it could be organization, company, finance, COVID, AI, right? There's all these different evolutions of things that go on. And they're not basic, but they're common things that go on. And I've just seen in my experiences in leading teams is that transparency and that safe space. So,
yeah, and I think inviting those people that aren't on board with it to kind of just give them the time on your couch to dump, listen, right? Let them kind of like the airing of the grievances, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's very therapeutic, and it's just what needs to happen in order for people to go through this emotional process, right? Because it's not really all about kind of what makes sense. Some of it's very kind of tied to emotions and just kind of the personal aspects of just accepting change.
Absolutely. So true. And I think sometimes people forget that change is sometimes a grieving process for folks. Right? I am losing my friends, my coworkers, my colleagues. I'm losing a major part of the organization. Maybe the owner is leaving or they're selling the business, right? These things for people who are closely tied to what they do every day is a lot for them to process. And so, no, you can't just say, well, it's good, right? It's good for the budget. It's good for the finance department. Like, just get over it. It doesn't work for people who are emotionally invested. And I think I would rather have employees who are emotionally invested in the change than folks who were disengaged in the workplace and were just allowing things to happen in like willy-nilly to them.
So to all that, there's the other person that is against it. So is there strategies, is there ideas of how do we, because you don't want to, the bad apple in the bunch, right? How do we negate those, not negate, but how do we solve for those and, tackle those situations so it doesn't get worse?
So I think it's again about being transparent, hearing them out, because they might have some valid concerns as to why this change doesn't work, or is it going to work well for them or their department or their teams. But then I think it's also a point for us to say, listen, Jill, Joe, you get on or you get off.
Get on the bus, right? Or don't get on the bus. But the bus is departing. You could either be on it or maybe left behind, right?
Yeah, because you can't have this person out spewing their same rhetoric. You don't know who they have influence over. And so you got to be able to say, listen, if you aren't able to contain your discontent with this change, we're not going to be able to continue in this way. And I hate that for folks. But the reality is a business is going to change. And if I've shown you the number, I've shown you the data, I've shown you the rationale, I've given you time to grieve, I've allowed you to air your grievances on my couch and on my shoulder. What else would you like me to do now saying, oh, we're just not going to change it because you don't like it?
So what can, not even just HR, I think managers in general, right, and people, what can they do to strengthen that change management? What ideas, philosophies, tips can you share?
I think the feedback loop is probably it. I think allowing people to receive the information and ask tons of questions. No question is stupid. It doesn't matter how many times you have to answer it. Consider other alternatives to the way you're answering questions, because sometimes folks will say, oh yeah, okay, great. And they'll walk away and they have no idea what you just said to them. Like that answer did not resonate at all. It did not land, and they still are frustrated by you not being able to say what it is. The other thing is saying, I don't know when I don't know. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many leaders will just back babble into an answer when it's like, you really don't know. Just say, I don't know, and let that be it. And I think it's even more important for you not to lie. If you know we're going left and you're telling people we're going right, there is a level of resentment that will almost never allow that person to come back into a relationship with you for any future change. And so maybe you can't tell them we're going right today, or you can't tell them we're going left, but you need to at least be honest and say, hey, I'm not able to disclose that right now. I personally don't know if it's right or left, or at the time when we know, we'll release that information. But lying flat out is never going to do it. So be transparent, answer all the questions, and even create alternative ways. And then, of course, make sure that you're not lying to anyone and saying, I don't know when I don't know.
So how can HR folks then train in this, right? Like, how do you get better at change management?
So this is my lovely sweet spot. I'm a big proponent for change. I've been in leading or training. So I've been leading departments and leading this type of work for a long time. And the reality is people want to do what you want them to do, and they want to do a good job at it. But if you don't give them the tools, there's no way they can. And we can't be frustrated after the fact. And so I think when we roll out a change, we should be having these types of meetings that involve all those who are impacted and those who are part of the messaging team to say, here is what's happening. Here is why it's happening. Here are your talking points. Here is the timeline. Are there any inputs or feedbacks here? And then we're making sure that we know how they're going to go out and deliver this. And so what I would imagine a good training moment is for leaders to sit with their next level leader down and say, let me hear you deliver this change or change message to me. And where there is a level of discomfort, or there is a level of lack of transparency, or anything that might just be a little bit misaligned with the overall message, is where you in that moment can coach that leader and say, well, it's more like this than like this.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I know people hate the role playing, right? But I've actually used it, and I've been on the other side of it where I've had to kind of do that and be challenged. And my boss plays the adversarial employee, right? And we all hate it, but it really does give you the opportunity to refine your messaging, anticipate what might be coming, right? And have a chance at being successful. And I think it's not only what you're saying, it's like you believing what you're saying. I think the more times you say it, the more times you kind of go through that, the more effective that's going to be. So I think that's great advice. Having that kind of sounding board, having someone to role play with is a great strategy.
Absolutely. The other thing I would input here is having your leaders trained on public speaking and presentation skills ahead of a major change. You cannot wait until a moment of duress to say, oh, well, now let me make sure you know how to do messaging points and you're media trained. Like, no, it's too late now, right? It should be a skill that you're giving your leaders as part of their leadership role on a regular cadence. And we train so many leaders or professionals around, this is how you deliver a message in a way that resonates with your audience and still gets your point across the way in a concise manner. And so that's something that I think more organizations should invest in for their people, because this is a skill that they can now take with them forever.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that is overlooked often, because when people see a C in front of a job title, they think that automatically should be something the person is going to do effectively. And I know from experience that is not always the case, right?
Yeah, spot on. Spot on.
So one of the things we like to do is share kind of a tale from the trench. And with all the experience you have, I don't know if you have a great story you'd like to share with our audience. It could be something that went well, it could be something that went poorly, but
yeah. So I'll tell you a story, and so this is going to sound so true when I tell you how much chaos it's caused. You're going to be like, no way, Ciera. So working in an organization where swag, branded apparel, is a thing, okay? And so the organization is very, very large, and the way they distribute apparel is based on your ability essentially to turn in what we call like swag bucks, right? And there is a digital system where your swag bucks are uploaded. So Joe has 1,000 swag bucks, Jill has 7,000 swag bucks, and then you can come up and buy things. Now, here's where this goes wrong. You put all of your swag out for folks to come and buy at the top of the week. Call it Monday morning, okay? Folks who work Monday morning will then what? Buy all of the swag.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff, all the good sizes are gone because nobody's buying an extra small, right? Like that good medium, large right there. Like that's the sweet spot of swag sizing. And then you get to the back half of the week, right? Call it Friday night. There is no swag left. And now we have all these people who are walking around in this cool new swag, and there is none to be found anywhere else in the organization. And then you double that with, well, we weren't buying any more of that because that was a spring collection.
Yeah, so we can't even take it on back order. You can't even just
wait. Done. It's done. We're not getting any more of that. And now this sounds so trivial. Oh, it's swag. But when you have people who are engaged in your workforce so much so that they want to wear your branded apparel, they want to walk around in their communities and let people know they work for your organization, and you haven't had the foresight to think, do we have enough? Or have we put in some type of distribution channel to say everyone is going to have access to this? I cannot tell you how big of a deal this is, right? So I would say that's for sure a change that didn't go well, right? Ordering swag and distributing it along the wrong scheduling for the organization's business operations.
You know what? I love this example because I know every person out there was like, oh my gosh, yes. Like the thing that blew up the most was something that everyone would have just said, I don't even need to think about it. I just, right? Of course I do it on a Monday, right?
Put it out. People will buy it. We have so much. It'll be fine. Doesn't work that way. And Jill, that's a really good point, right? The things people aren't worried about are the things that other people are worried about a lot.
Yes, that is so true and so unfortunate for all of us HR professionals.
Yeah.
We know, right? You're like, this doesn't matter, right? But like, no, it does. It does.
It does, because it's a similar story where we wanted to do something new for new hires. And so the idea was, and the experience was they didn't come in with pen and paper and different other things. So it's like, hey, let's get them a Padfolio with paper and pens. And
why not?
Absolutely. It's great. They get to walk around with it. And I brought it up, and the question was, everyone else is going to want one of these, and why are only the new hires getting them? And I started last week, and you had to draw a line, and you had to be able to do that, but it was a change, and it was a management that we had to go through, and you kind of couldn't say, I gave that one to this one and this one there, because then it was just, but yeah, but people love swag. People love, and that shows a great culture, like you said. So it's resonated with me because I had to do that with onboarding. And it was, it was a little bit of a situation, but you managed through it.
Yeah, you figure it out, especially during the onboarding period, because you miss one person who doesn't get the swag allotment that everyone else got. Automatically now this person's employee experience is tanking, right? Why didn't I get it? It's something special about me. You didn't want me to have it. I don't feel welcome here. I don't have a t-shirt to wear to the company office event next week. Like, it's always going to be a thing.
So yeah, this was awesome, Ciera. I really appreciate you coming and joining. Any last comments, any follow-up, any summarization you'd want to share for everybody on change management and what to do and what not to do?
Yeah, I think it's important for you to make sure you have the right folks at the table. Have open conversations about what won't go well and what our mitigation plan if it doesn't, what it is if it doesn't. And then making sure that we're prepared to be as transparent as we can be with everyone that's involved and those who we think aren't involved. And if you're ever so concerned about this being something that can't leak or something that's really going to have a major impact if it does, it's important to make sure that you have the right documentation in place. And sometimes we don't talk about this enough. But if you're going through an M&A or if you are having some type of buyout or anything along those lines, has your organization signed the paperwork to say that this is something that we should keep internally? And then they know that there are repercussions if they don't. I know that's a morbid way to end the call, but
no, very important statement that don't assume anything and make it imminently clear to every person what is internal only, what can't be shared externally, timelines for those things, getting authorization for those things. So that's possibly a whole nother call as far as due diligence and document control and all those kinds of things, but very important to not minimize those things, because I think if you don't give direction on it and have those guidelines, you can just assume that something is going to go wrong and it isn't going to go the way that you want it to go. So very good closing words. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Ciera. Like I said, it's a topic Joe and I've really wanted to tackle for a long time. I know I'm walking away going, budget? I haven't thought about budget. There's a few takeaways I have on my own where I'm going to say, I want to do a little bit more planning on my side and think about how can I maybe incorporate some of your ideas and best practices as I embark on different aspects of my role.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited about sharing this information with the world, and we're welcome any conversations for folks who are trying to get this right.
That was a great conversation, Ciera. Thank you for being with us. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to follow, like, and share. Until next time.